We're not talking about shiny heroes. We're not talking about straight up villains. We're kind of talking about the ground between the grey, as it were. So, I mean, you don't want your characters to be actually unlikable, but they're characters that are not obviously likable, I suppose you might say. They're flawed people. They're people who seem heroic, but we realise as readers are actually quite awful in some way. Or they're people who seem awful, but perhaps have hidden qualities. They're mixed bags capable of shocking and surprising the reader. And that generally is what, as a reader, I like, and what, as a writer, I'm trying to do, is to produce a character who feels like they can believably shock the reader.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 154 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week are my two amazing co-hosts. First up is the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, MJ Kuhn. How you doing, MJ?
Hello, I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Doing swell, thank you. And also joining us is my bestie from the Midwestie, the queen of my days, Greta Kelly. How's it going, Greta?
Hello.
Your laugh wasn't loud enough. No.
Oh, no.
The marriage has soured. And if you want to support MJ in her quest to quit her day job and feed her cat because he's skinny and he's like 90% fur, go buy Among Thieves, which is book 1 in the Tales of Tomorrow duology, for your dose of heists and hatchets and the non-H word whores, which is my go-to trio. I had to bring it back, MJ.
I know, I love that. I just feel like it makes people think it's going to be spicier than it is, which is not spicy at all. But if you want something that has a tiny bit of spice, ooh, look at that transition.
There you go.
The Frozen Crown by the lovely Greta Kelly. One of many, many books, or 3 books total so far she has out. She has this and the sequel, and then Queen of Days, which we've mentioned before. So check those out to support the lovely Greta.
Yes, and of course, get your daily dose of murder, mayhem, and mushrooms by going and checking out Mushroom Blues by Adrian. Woohoo!
Everything's better with fungi.
Yes,
because Adrian's such a fun guy.
I'm gonna take that out, and I'm just gonna just use that as Joe promoting my book. No, yeah.
On the cover of Booktube.
Joe blurbed my book. What? Oh my god. And if you want to support this wonderful shit show on Patreon, you can go check out our Patreon for a bunch of cool extras like bonus episodes, author readings, and more. So check the links in the description below if you want to help us do what we do here. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now, you've already seen him, joining us once again, Joe Abercrombie, author of the First Law trilogy, the Age of Madness trilogy, and more, including his most devilish new book, The Devils, which is out now. Welcome back, Joe. How are you?
I'm all right.
You recorded one episode with us, and he's like,
I'm supposed to be
blink twice if you're being held hostage.
So,
no. Raise one eyebrow and then the next. That's what he's.
No, that one's harder. I don't know why. I'm supposed to be touring in a couple of weeks, so I'm gearing up.
Getting ready.
Yeah,
do the events.
You're coming to my town.
Yeah, you're gonna be chatting with Evan.
So
Evan Likable,
when you're in the event with Evan Likable, I'm skiing, so I'll meet you. I work with that bookshop a lot, so yeah.
Awesome.
We'll get to hang out.
Hey!
That's very cool. Nice. Yeah, it's the first time I've really been around the States in any depth, so I'm really looking forward to it. Actually.
Nice.
Yeah, dude, your tour, you got you're just who's the biggest fucking author in this area, and you're just well, come on, Brandon, come on, Patrick Rothfuss.
These guys just desperate to be seen.
They're so thirsty.
They're
my gosh.
blowing up your phone. It's wild.
It's actually, this is actually.
Oh my god, Greta, I can't get it out of my head that you said they're so thirsty.
And I stand by it.
I stand by it. All right. We're burning bridges left and right. Well, a heads up, this is part 2 of our chat with Joe, so I recommend checking out part 1 to get to know him better. Today, though, we're delving into the dark heart of fiction's most vile personalities as we explore how to write unlikable characters and why, for some goddamn reason, we love them so, so much. Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Welcome to Transference, where death and sickness are but a distant memory. Nicholas Five Boroughs is a sicko, someone that takes on others' illnesses. In a city where diseases can be transferred, the rich buy longer lives without pain, and the poor get a short life of constant sickness. Brought back from the brink of death by his friend Brian Meadowhearth, or maybe the invisible hand of an outside actor, Nick finally gets the chance to try and change things, to finally stop the whole disease transfer network. Tensions escalate as Nick infiltrates a higher society he doesn't understand, and starts to fall for Dorothy Sungate, the very person he needs to manipulate to be successful. And between run-ins with a talking cat, genetically modified humans, and a robotic police force, the world around him just keeps getting stranger. Can Nicholas tear down the disease transfer architecture? And how much of his humanity is he willing to bargain along the way? A dystopian vision of healthcare and a market economy, Transference will appeal to fans of Red Rising, Blade Runner, and the BioShock franchise. Soon to be a complete duology with the release of Transcendence in the summer of 2025. Transference by Ian Patterson is available now in paperback and ebook. Get your copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. And so to kick off this masterclass, Joe, from your perspective, if you want to just give people an idea of how you view what is an unlikable character.
Difficult question, actually. Really started with a curveball. I suppose, well, what are we not talking about? We're not talking about shiny heroes. We're not talking about straight up villains. We're kind of talking about the ground between the grey, as it were. So, I mean, you don't want your characters to be actually unlikable, but they're characters that are not obviously likable, I suppose you might say. They're flawed people. They're people who seem heroic, but we realise as readers are actually quite awful in some way. Or they're people who seem awful, but perhaps have hidden qualities. They're mixed bags, capable of shocking and surprising the reader. And that generally is what, as a reader, I like, and what, as a writer, I'm trying to do, is to produce a character who feels like they can believably shock the reader.
Yeah. So is that part of, do you think that kind of realism about the person, right? Where they are a mixed bag, where real life people are often such a mixed bag.
Always,
Do you think
MJ,
that's what
always a
helps
mixed
people
bag.
connect with them? What is it you think that's drawing, maybe even just speaking as yourself, as a consumer of media?
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because every character is a kind of separate case, and every character is very individual, and their particular makeup, what makes them effective, is kind of very different. I mean, I think of Tyrion Lannister within the fantasy canon, the epitome of the kind of grey character, because he's got a terrible reputation. To many of the characters within the story, he's this cunning, poisonous imp. He's physically repugnant. He's from a family that is very cunning, conniving, and unpleasant, and is definitely are the villains to a large number of the characters. But he also has many positive and admirable qualities. You know, he's funny, which is extremely important. He's clever. He's an underdog. And you love to see him kind of get the better of these privileged fools who've had a much easier ride than he has. So I suppose that's the particular balance that makes that character work. They need something, some quality that makes them admirable or attractive, even amongst a set of qualities that don't. And every character that type is a slightly different formula.
Have you always been drawn to these kind of unlikable characters? Were there stories or TV shows or movies growing up where you saw someone like not the stereotypical good guy that you just couldn't stop rooting for?
I mean, yeah, I've always been interested in them, definitely. I suppose a lot of the fantasy I read when I was younger followed, Tolkien in having a world where you have an objective good and an objective evil. And in a way, that makes it very hard for characters to fit between the two camps, because you're never in any doubt as to what the right side is. There's not a lot of doubt there. And so, say in Lord of the Rings, the great majority of the characters you can sort into one camp or the other. But the ones I always found most interesting were maybe Boromir, who obviously turns a little bit. Boromir is much more interesting to me than Aragorn, because Aragorn is incapable of failure, right? He never fails. He always succeeds. And despite being a murderer, mass murderer of orcs, but he can go back to being a good king and a sensitive lover and a good friend and all those things, and not really pay any price. Whereas Boromir is a guy who's racked with doubts. He's got Aragorn being all perfect, so it's very hard to measure up to. He's tempted by the ring, and that to me is just a more interesting guy. And then he fails, of course. He fails and has to pay the price for his failure. So he's caught kind of, between the two. And Saruman I always found a lot more interesting than Gandalf. Similarly, Saruman I feel is the kind of Silicon Valley billionaire of Middle Earth. He's got the vision, right? He's got the vision for a better world. But these Luddite elves and small c conservative stewards of Gondor just cannot see the way he's trying to make society so much better. They don't want the furnaces, they don't want the woods cut down. They don't want a fair shake for the Dunlending. They don't want a better and more muscular orc. But Saruman's got the vision, but he can't convince anyone. He's a kind of I see him as a tragic case, the real hero of those stories. But he's a mixed bag, isn't he? That's what I find interesting. And though he ends up as a kind of Palantir polishing recluse, which is a sad end, I find that he's a lot more interesting than Gandalf, Gandalf is either a glorious hero looked at from one lens, but through the other end of the telescope, if you're an orc, Gandalf seems this horrifying totalitarian. He has no doubt, does he, Gandalf? He's sure he's right, and that's kind of a scary thing. So anyway, Saruman and Boromir would be my picks from Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure how we even got there.
That metaphor is beautiful. I'm just trying to in my head picture of who are the Ents, the hob, are they the Green Party
Union guys
of Middle Earth, Union guys.
Union guys trying to keep everything the way it's always been. Saruman's he wants to just modernize.
We're gonna throw rocks at you.
Oh my god!
Fuck your tower, man.
Somebody Photoshop Saruman as
Please.
a Silicon Valley tech bro, please. Thank you.
Please, I need that.
I need it. I need it in my life.
Like Elon Musk stroking his Palantir.
Palantir is even used as one of the tech companies is called Palantir, isn't it? It's they're like a
Something
facial
along those lines.
recognition and data crunching company of some sort, I think. Anyway.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah,
Sounds
who
right.
knows?
I'll figure it out. Tell us in the comments below who Palantir.
There we go. Wrong answers only.
Yeah, wrong answers only. Make it fun. Add some Photoshop in there. So what kind of alchemy goes into, you've touched on it a little bit, but alchemy of making readers fall in love with not yet likable characters or not immediately obvious why they're likable. How does maybe empathy play into this equation or humor, as you were saying before?
I suppose, the cheat is putting you in the head of the person, where you can see their justifications and their motives and their reasons. And I suppose just bearing in mind always that it's a bit of a cliche, but I've always loved those. That, you know, everyone is the hero of their story, and so everyone has their reasons for what they do, you know. And so when you're inside the head of even the most unpleasant villain, I mean, Sauron wants to be the villain, perhaps, but very, very few people do. Saruman certainly doesn't think he's the villain. Saruman thinks he's improving Middle-earth and he's just trying to get his policy platform through against difficult opposition. So I suppose putting people in the head of the character is the first step to making them, in a way, sympathetic. Having a voice, a unique voice that the character can kind of use to get a sense of the person, of a unique person that is unlike anyone you've encountered before, is important. And humour is kind of, I think, where those two meet, you know, the voice and the sense of person. And humour's a kind of very powerful tool, because my experience has been that people will forgive pretty much anything for someone who's funny and charming, you know. And Tyrion is a good example of that. Again, he can be as kind of unpleasant as you like, but that wit is the redeeming feature, both for the reader and for the characters around them. And so I think putting someone in the head is one thing, and that unique sense of humour is something that readers will always respond to well.
Is that what, Joe, you've worked on for yourself?
The unique sense of humour.
As long as you're humorous and charismatic,
I got
you can get away with
the
anything.
humor and that charm.
Still a work in progress.
That'll carry me through.
You know, I try.
It's working so far.
I like it.
You're doing good, man.
Well, when you're building your characters out, do you, I mean, you probably don't necessarily go into it going, I'm going to make this character unlikable. But, you know, I would imagine probably going into it going, I need to make sure this character has some sort of flaws, right? Some sort of really tangible, you know, chips in their armor. Is that a conscious part of the process, or is it kind of a more natural result of, you know, like let's walk through a process, or like when you were making Glocta. I love Glocta. I'm sure I'm not the only
I
one.
knew you were going to say Glocta.
I knew you knew I was going to say Glocta.
You perched. I knew it was
because
coming.
like literally, as the first time I was reading the first law, I literally like texted a friend of mine that had read it before, and I was like, am I supposed to like Glocta? Because I feel like it's problematic how much I like Glocta right now. But like, what did the process of that look like? Like, did the flaws in that character come first, or was that part of the, you know, the nascent part of that process?
It's always difficult to look back on things like that and sort of, because it's obviously quite a long time ago. It's 20 years ago I was writing that book as well. And often when a book's been out a long time, you'll have heard quite a lot of people talk about it. You'll have heard a lot of opinions about it. And you start to kind of drink your own Kool-Aid a bit, you know? People will say, well, obviously what he's doing is this. And you'll think, was I doing that? Oh, maybe I was doing that. That sounds clever. Yeah, that's what I was doing. Yeah, must be what I was doing. And a lot of it was just instinctive. And I suppose what I was trying to do when I started the first law was just write a classic fantasy story with some interesting types of characters, some characters who might normally be the villains of the piece. And Glocta's possibly the sort of most intense example of the kind of things I was talking about earlier, because he's a torturer. He's not even a terribly righteous torturer. He's a guy who gets false confessions out of people. He's kind of, well, cowardly is the wrong word, but he's conniving. He doesn't say what he thinks. He's a liar. He operates in this very Machiavellian kind of sphere. So seen from the outside, he's pretty despicable. He's also, you know, ugly, wounded, scarred, seen as, in this society that quite values physical perfection and nobility, seen as a kind of non-person and a reject, an outsider. So from outside, he'd be pretty awful. He wouldn't be a very attractive character at all. But from inside, you first of all get to see he's in constant pain, which gives you a kind of a sense of his endeavor and his, I suppose, his kind of resilience. He's got a core of refusing to be beaten, which I think people quite like. And the situations he's in are often kind of impossible or very, very difficult. And so you get to see him twist around trying to win in very, very difficult circumstances. Like Tyrion, he's always an underdog and an outsider. And I think people find that attractive. And with Glockter, there's a kind of a cheat because he has his thoughts in italics. So it's a sort of a direct addressing of the reader, almost like a first person within the third person. And that allows you to address the reader very directly. So they feel like they're in a conversation with him, a private conversation with him, which no one else is party to. And they get to see his very private thoughts, which are sometimes quite funny. And they're also very much at odds with what he says. So you get to see this secret person that the rest of the world doesn't. So you feel like you're in a little club with him. And I suppose that, again, helps to pull the reader in to kind of his confidence. So you feel like you're part of the team. And so I suppose that was, some of the thought process and some of what just developed instinctively as I was going along. But looking back now, I suppose those are some of the things I'd pick out as helping to make him bearable.
Mm-hmm. It's like, welcome to Club Glockta.
Say more than bearable. I love
because MJ, I remember you and I had a conversation about it, and you were like, the first thing that made you empathize with him was his hatred of stairs.
Yes, the first line is like, "Damn stairs!" Like,
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you know what? Stairs
Fuck
do
stairs.
kind of suck sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, he grew partly out of
cats.
having a bad back at one point, and I was crawling up the stairs to the toilet on one occasion with a bad back, and I thought, man, stairs.
Yeah,
Not a fan.
just channel that
Right?
into writing.
Well, I was thinking,
Do you have-
what would it be? What would a man be like who was just constantly afflicted by so much pain that everyone else's discomfort was just of no interest or importance?
Yeah.
And that
And
was kind of where he came from.
Mhm. I like what
Yeah.
you were saying about structure, though, like the way, or not structure, but like actual, the actual
Like narrative
use,
voice of
the narrative
using-
voice and the way that you were able to use italics to convey information both to the other characters and everyone participating in scenes with Glockta, but then information that the reader themselves are privy to. And I wanted to get your take on how you, like, looking back, I mean, you look back at Glockta, but then looking at the Devils, if there's a certain character or approach that you took in the Devils, because you were balancing so many different characters in the cast of that book, how you were able to utilize certain craft tools in order to effectively engage people with characters who might not seem immediately likable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I suppose likability is never the first thing on my mind. The first thing on my mind is developing the voice. And I think, hopefully, if you develop a sort of distinct voice, an attitude to the world, a way of expressing yourself, themselves, for the character, then that becomes interesting and likable in itself. So, with, say, Vigor, the aim there was this kind of messy stream of consciousness, which is constantly getting distracted by other things and wandering off. And that was developed really just through trial and error and sitting down and just starting to splurge out a kind of a routine day. I mean, the first scene from her point of view is just her going to the river to get water and walking through the camp, really. And it's just like a stream of consciousness of nonsense. You get quite a lot of her past and her thoughts about other people. So, I mean, relationships is something we've not necessarily mentioned yet, in that no character's an island, or generally very few are. good characters certainly don't tend to be. They exist within a set of relationships and a set of other people. And as a writer, that's a very powerful tool you have as well, is to use the relationships around them, because generally speaking, dialogue is very powerful and economical way of writing. You know, if you, with a couple of lines of dialogue, you can get across something about both the characters involved, the relationship between them, and move the plot and perhaps inform the reader. So it's very elegant and very fast to do that. And so often these days I'll try and, you know, deliberately set a character within a group of a couple of others. So Glockter, for instance, exists with his practicals, Severed and Frost, who in a way are kind of external. They're not really characters so much as they are, you know, parts of him that he can address and talk to and bounce ideas off. And also there's a certain level of, you know, humanity you get out of someone when they're dealing with people who they like, perhaps, or who they deal with a lot. And so in The Devils, you know, the way that Vigor relates to Alex, who's with her, is kind of also important, because there's a certain level of likability to these fumbling attempts to build a normal relationship with someone normal, you know. So I suppose relationship with other characters is also something you need to think about early on. Who's in their circle who can get something positive out of them, even if they're basically quite unpleasant. And, you know, situation is very important. So, I mean, Glockter is obviously a torturer, but he tends to torture, at least initially, quite unpleasant people. And for better or worse, you can give someone a bit of a pass for that. A bit.
It's like you can be forgiven.
Well, you know,
he was a dick too.
the problem is you kind of can. You probably shouldn't. You kind of can.
But some fucked up part of us is just like, yeah.
I mean, if he was like
yeah,
torturing kittens or something, then it'd be very hard to get away with that, right? But he's torturing corrupt merchants and, you know, assassins and other unpleasant people. So we can let that be, and only later do we perhaps get to, you know, darker territory where it's a bit less easy to forgive. And you know, that's maybe something you'd want to do with an unlikable character, is start with sympathetic and then gradually draw them into nastier territory where the reader starts to feel, oh, I kind of like this guy, but now I feel a bit uncomfortable and I don't kind of know what to think. Part of the appeal of Glockter is that he does the things and thinks the things we don't want to say or do, but perhaps kind of do a little bit. You know, who wouldn't want to have their boss in the chair on occasion? You know, I mean, you wouldn't want to actually, but just the thought of doing it is.
Oh my god!
You know. So he's able to do those things that we would never want to do. He's not constrained by the rules of society, and there's a certain appeal to that, I think, too.
Just the things that we daydream about.
Yeah.
You know, fanciful daydream.
Maybe it's just me.
Inside thoughts or outside words.
Greta's mom voice coming in.
Yeah. Well, one of the things like I always find so fascinating about unlikable characters is that they still grow and change over the course of a story, just like any other character. So is creating a character arc for someone who is more morally gray for you any different than creating a character arc for your more traditional hero type?
I mean, I suppose it can go in a different direction, potentially. If someone starts very much on the right side morally, where do they go? In a way, they either stay where they are morally or they get worse. And getting worse is, of course, quite a fascinating arc. I mean, in Bestselling Cold, the idea was always to have two central characters, one of whom gets steadily worse through the course of it, and one of whom, to some degree, is redeemed. You know, they kind of complement each other. And so I suppose it gives you a certain level of latitude. There are different places you can go with an unlikable character. They can become less likable. They can become more likable. You can become unsure about whether they're hero or villain. I mean, Aragorn, we're kind of told, well, here's a guy he's a guy who might become king one day. Do you know how it ends? He becomes king in that story.
Spoilers.
Spoiler. So there's
You
not.
know when Aragorn was the coolest was when he was Strider. I want
Yes,
to know, like,
True.
more.
he was
Yeah.
mysterious and a little bit of a bad
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah.
You know, and then he got a crown.
Just
It was all like,
not even a little bit. He was like sweaty in that candlelit
Yeah.
tavern.
Stubble.
He went all corporate. Ugh.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, that's true. All corporate. Man. Yeah, he had a meeting in HR and they spruced him right up. Get a razor, man.
Oh my god. But yeah, I think like character arcs are really interesting in the sense of, yeah, there's so many directions you can go with it. But I think a reader's understanding of the character is a huge part of how they feel about that particular character by the end of the story. So how do you kind of play with the ways in which you present a character to the reader over time to get them to develop that connection and that fascination with the character, so that by the end, regardless of how that character arc plays out, the reader's like, fuck yes, I'm invested.
Yeah, I mean I suppose that's the whole trick of writing fiction, in a sense, isn't it? Getting the reader gripped and ride or die with the character, like they're fascinated by what that character's doing. They can't wait to see how it turns out. If you've got that, then you've won as a writer, right? I mean, plot, action, all those other things are sort of details. Once someone's really gripped by a character, my feeling's always been that, you know, the most classic writers and the most classic stories are sort of defined by the classic characters more than anything. So the character is the absolute heart and soul. So I'm not sure I've got a shortcut to that holy grail of getting a character who's completely grips you. And I think in a way, you know, some of my most successful characters are my first ones. You know, Glockter and Logan, who were, you know, the first characters I came up with, really, the first characters in the first trilogy. Frustratingly, they still are some of the most successful, if not the most successful ones. And a lot of my career, I feel like I've spent trying to kind of recapture what came effortlessly at the start, which is kind of a frustrating thing to say, in a sense. You kind of, I suppose as a writer, you have all this stuff you build up during your life, these concerns, these ideas, experiences, things you've read, things you've loved, you know. And a lot of that often comes out in your first book. And then you're faced with this question of, okay, so now what do I do? Now I've kind of used up that stuff. You have to think of new ideas and you have to work out things and you have to craft comes to compensate somewhat for inspiration, if that makes sense. And I think often you spend a lot of your time trying to recapture the sort of sense of exuberance you had right at the start, if that makes any sense. I've now forgotten what the question was and where we came from. Hopefully it doesn't matter too much.
Well, it did make sense, yes, but more so about like capturing reader attention and their investment in the characters.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish I did. I wish I did. I mean, I suppose again it comes back to most things come back to revision for me, which is, it sounds kind of dull, but I find a first draft is often not great. First draft has seeds of ideas in it, some things that work, and over time and over lots of kind of phases of revision, you refine things down to hopefully create the effect you want. And so part of it is reading over, thinking, how does this strike me as a writer? Is this working? Is this, you know, grabbing me? How can I improve it? How can I change it? How can I refine this character to have a, you know, more effect on the reader? So constant process of revision is what produces the powerful voice, and it's the powerful voice that kind of grips the reader, I suppose.
Yeah. I love that, because I think that a lot of times, you know, drafting gets all the whatever, the flowers. And
Yeah.
it really
The
is
romantic
though. Like
part.
for me, a big part of the creative process happens during
MJ,
revision.
you're
and, you
you're
know, I
you're
don't
like
think we talk
you're
about that
ride or
enough.
die. You're ride or die with revision.
Oh yeah, I hate the drafting process. I never feel stupider than I do during a first draft.
Jesus.
Like, revisions are where the magic
Testify, sister.
Right. Let's go. But okay, so let's walk through a scenario. So let's say, because this is kind of a common problem that I think, especially, you know, maybe newer writers may have, where they end up creating a character that kind of has no flaws, right? It's like this, you know, perfect shining character, right?
Can we call it like the Aragorn paradox?
Yeah, but it's like even more so than Aragorn, because like at least Aragorn has like, you know, at least he's kind of a, you know, leads Eowyn on, and we can be mad at him about that. Like,
And he's got the stubble.
But
He's
it's
got
like
the
the
stubble.
deeper, like Twilight syndrome of Bella's only flaw was that she was kind of clumsy.
yeah, right, exactly. We get, like,
Yeah.
the Mary Sue Marty Stew kind of vibe,
Yeah.
right? Say we have a first draft and that's what we've written, and we find ourselves bored with our protagonist, and we're like, ugh. How might you go about seeding flaws in, or, you know, just giving, like, what advice would you give to a writer that is in that state when they're entering revisions and they want to make this character a little grittier, right? A little more unlikable.
I suppose in that case, I mean, I tend to work outwards the other way. So that's not necessarily where I'd find well, it's that thing of I wouldn't start from here, which is never very useful. But I suppose if I was looking at a completed manuscript, I'd say, okay, so where's the conflict coming from, and where are the triggers that are going to expose the flaws and the unpleasantness within this character? And my approach to that would probably be to introduce some sort of foil, some sort of obstacle that is going to draw from that person a reaction that is perhaps unpleasant to the reader, or, you know, gives a different dimension to the character, if you like. It's interesting because I think a character can only be totally pure in that way in the absence of problems within the story. I suppose looking at something like Lord of the Rings, Aragorn can be quite morally simple because the world is morally simple, which is to say, Sauron's evil, resisting Sauron is good. There's no question. That is the metaphysical facts of that universe, right? People think of Eddard Stark from Game of Thrones as a grey character, but he's an honourable, noble bloke, basically very moral. But he's in a very difficult world, in a very grey, difficult world where the right thing is not easy to pick often. You know, he's given these no-win situations, these problems to weigh up. You know, does he defend his daughter and perhaps doom his family, or does he compromise and, you know, damage his daughter? Aragorn doesn't have those sort of problems. He has different problems, but he's not got the same doubts and the same kind of grey. He doesn't live in a grey world where the choices are necessarily difficult. So Eddard, to me, is a very similar character to Aragorn, but in a very different set of circumstances. And so I would imagine if you've got a very squeaky clean hero, you've also probably got quite a simple world that's not challenging the characters or kind of drawing the sparks from them that you need to make the story dynamic and exciting. So I think that I'd look there, not necessarily the character first, but at what is going to draw something exciting and different and challenging out of the character. And perhaps that's an element you can introduce or think about introducing that will then give you the chance to think about the character a little bit differently, and let them show a different side, which you can then, through endless revision, draw out.
Well, I'd love to like dive into that just a little bit deeper because I always love talking about world building. Do you have some like favorite elements of world building that you use to just make everything a little bit more difficult on your characters, or just a little bit more morally gray? Like, is it political things that you tend to go back to, or is it different kind of elements that you're looking at?
I suppose there are certainly political elements in the sense that, well, again, to use the comparison of Middle Earth to A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, Middle-earth is very much two camps. There's a good and there's an evil. And the characters like Saruman and Boromir who cross over are, to me, that bit more interesting. And then A Game of Thrones becomes exponentially more complex because there are so many different camps, different cultures, different kind of conflicting ideas of right, conflicting ideas of honor, even. And so that creates this really complicated world. I mean, I maybe come across as implying that Middle-earth is kind of not very good, which is not what I mean to do. It's merely, it's a certain kind of story, and that became very dominant. And so I think the opposite is kind of interesting. And so with the Game of Thrones, you get this very grey world in which every person has their own concept of right. And it's sort of the collision between different ideas of right that create the conflict, rather than the conflict being something ordained by the nature of the universe. And I suppose that, to me, feels more authentic to the way the world is, at least the way it is in the modern age, where we're kind of used to thinking of a moral relativism where everyone has their own kind of concept of right. And absolute right is kind of a scary thing, the idea of absolute right, because it allows you to do anything in the cause of the greater good, which again is another kind of grey, perhaps.
Just ignorant evil.
Doubt is healthy, I suppose.
Doubt is very healthy. Not too much. We writers know how it goes when you doubt.
Yeah, no,
yourself
doubt's
so much,
not healthy if you're a writer. It's very unhealthy.
It's all a balance. It's all a balancing act.
Yeah.
But building on that a little bit, I think conflict is a really good jumping off point to talk about the actual characters themselves and the way that they are active in the story. Because another trap that a lot of authors fall into is like that character just is so passive, and there are things happening to them, but they are not acting upon the world. So how do you kind of how do you approach giving your characters things to do in the story that fit with the personality that you've developed for them, while also making sense in the context of like this is their arc and this is what's happening in the overall story?
I've got a bit of a penchant for directionless, rudderless characters who drift on the wind, which is supposed to be.
But there's a difference, though. It's like they're still doing things, There are some stories where it's like this character literally is just having shit happen to them. Like you don't feel like they have a choice in anything that they do.
I suppose, though, looking at the Devils, Alex is kind of the baggage on this trip. She doesn't really have much choice at all until very near the end. Brother Diaz is just given a job he's too cowardly to say no to and ends up stuck carrying the baby. Most of the others are all bound magically to obey the task, so they kind of have no choice either. So now I'm feeling like I fucked up.
We do. Okay, Joe. So this is the thing with the Devils, though.
Yeah.
They all have these larger forces that have forced them into this path.
Yep.
But on a
No, you're masterclassing me. I mean, what is this? Who is the master here exactly?
On a micro scale, so that's like the macro. On the micro scale, It's like Brother Diaz is still able to decide what things he wants to do at any given moment. He's able to, we're like walking with this person that I admire, so I'm just gonna fucking blow steam up her ass. Or we're in a battle and like we're in a really dire situation. The only choice is that I can like unleash Viga's werewolf fucking ferocity. So those are still micro choices that he's able to make, and he still has agency in that regard. Despite the fact that on a macro scale, the church was like, yo, you fucking holy expediency, let's go. Y'all have to do this and you have to go there.
And obviously I suppose the arc of, well, both Alex and Brother Diaz in a way is learning how to take charge and exercise a certain level of power, and also kind of finding the resources they do have, because they both have talents of a kind, but they have to be applied in the right way and at the right time. So yes, you're right. I am very good at
Don't
that.
be too hard on yourself. Come on. Rudderless does not mean they do not have agency.
Yes. Good. It's good to know. But yeah, agency is an odd one. I've never been that big with the idea of agency in a way. I mean, the First Law did feature quite a lot of rudderless characters, kind of. I think that was one of the things I'd probably change if I was doing it again, or that I'd look at differently now. Later books, there's a bit more of it. But what was the question exactly? Because I've now
Just how authors can go about avoiding their characters becoming too passive.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose
basically they're unlikable, but they're not bitching and wallowing for
Greta, and I quote, she said, passively whining and wallowing all over and over for the entire book.
I mean, I quite enjoy a bit of passive whining and wallowing. They say write what you know, and that is generally what I spend a lot of my time doing. So I might be the wrong person to ask on that particular question. But I suppose, you can always introduce shocks and reverses, and you can drag a character out of their kind of natural, comfortable setting. And I think that's often what, something that makes a story, that can be the heart of a story, is a character kind of being pulled out from what they know and what they're familiar with into something totally new and unfamiliar, and how they react to, something entirely different, dangerous, scary, way beyond their comfort zone. And, The Devils is a lot about that as well. It's about a couple of ordinary people suddenly being thrown into a world of magic and horror where they're completely unexperienced and lack any of the skills necessary to deal with it. So you can do that to a character at any time. I think there's no harm setting up someone who's quite whiny and wallowy, and in a way, seeing someone whiny and wallowy suddenly have to rise to a challenge or sink or swim is a lot of fun sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, winding down, let's get vulnerable. It's time. But no, let's talk about vulnerability in these kinds of characters, because I think when we think about these kind of more unlikable or like morally gray characters, on the outside, a lot of times they are kind of
alpha.
Yeah, Sigma males. No. But like, if we think about, like, I'm thinking, Logan, we've got, or like maybe even Shivers a little bit from Best Served Cold. Vigga, I'm thinking a little bit from The Devil's Right, where you've got these kind of characters that are, they're pretty tough as nails. How do we show vulnerability in these characters, or how do you bring that out so well? Is it all down to adding backstory, or are there some other strategies that you use as a writer?
I think it is down to adding backstory up to a point, and certainly down to the wonderful opportunity that a writer has, as opposed to a film type person, to just describe to you the inner monologue, the thoughts, the feelings, what goes through the head. And I mean, I do love a brittle alpha man struggling with the consequences of a life of violence. I've always found that very entertaining archetype, perhaps a Western archetype, but I've always liked that. How do you do it? I suppose you try and humanize up to a point. You try and imagine what's it like to be in these situations. I mean, very few people face extremely violent situations with total calmness. So if you're writing from the point of view inside the head of someone, you can have them be very scared. You can have them be terrified for the outcomes. You can have them be in a lot of pain. You can have them badly injured. All those things, help to make someone more interesting. I think, there's nothing more tedious than someone who never comes through a fight hurt or is always unscathed physically and emotionally by what happens. I want characters to just come out absolutely battered. if they come out at all. I find that much more entertaining and much more kind of true to life. And I respect more someone who ends up kind of bad. The ability to keep going is in a way more interesting than the ability to succeed. I think failure is something you don't see a lot of in fantasy, not enough of. I did a psychology degree, as I was saying earlier, and the main thing I studied was failure, appropriately enough. It's human reliability, human error, why things go wrong, why things fail, why ships sink. Not technically, but from a human standpoint. Why do reactors melt down? How do you design systems that are proof against these sort of things? And having read a lot of military history, war and battles, which is the basis of a lot of fantasy often, are as much, if not more, the story of people disastrously fucking up than they are the history of people leading wonderful and glorious charges and turning the tide of battle single-handed. So I've always loved characters who snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, who have all the cards and mess it up, who, fall on their face at the key moment. And I think we feel a lot for that kind of character because they ring truer probably than someone who always succeeds, and everyone can appreciate someone who falls on their face and then has to get up. So that's maybe one other way that you could help to humanize a otherwise shiny and simplistic alpha man.
It's like every sports movie ever.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that movie Rudy. It's just like failure after failure, face in the mud, but you get the fuck back up again.
Yeah.
And you fight.
You might go down, but you don't stay down, man.
What a great American accent. I love it.
That was pretty good.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, man. Well, this has been just incredible advice all around. But I guess to close out, do you have any final little tidbits of wisdom that you can share for any authors out there looking to write some morally gray assholes?
I mean, in terms of specifically morally grey, I don't know. But I guess the main thing I've learned is chair time in the chair, and that the muse visits the person who is already working. So just, don't wait for it to happen. Get to it. Make it happen. And then if it doesn't happen, cut it down, rework it, rethink it. Stay in the chair till you've got something you like. And have fun. Though those two things are kind of opposite. So, I don't know.
Sit in that chair until your ass molds into the seat.
Sit in that chair until you're having fun. Whatever that means.
Work that fucking coal mine, people.
Yeah.
Get the black lung. Have a good time. All right. Well, that's it for this writing masterclass and our two-parter with Joe. Thank you so much for exploring this topic with us, and really appreciate you taking the time.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Oh, you're welcome. Joe, where can folks find you online?
They can find me at www.joeabercrombie.com and also on Twitter at Lord Grimdark. That's supposed to be a joke. I'm not actually a real lord.
Go listen to last episode to get his thoughts on Grimdark as well.
Exactly. And I think I'm on Blue Sky at joeabercrombie.com also.
Fantastic. And The Devils is out now. Joe's on tour in the States. So if you are around, just I think either your website or your Instagram, you can find all those fun tour days. You can go meet MJ if you're
if you're in Southeastern Michigan.
Yeah.
Come to the event from Sidetrack Books. Come see both of us. Yeah.
Go hang out.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. And just support Joe, his fantastic work. Go pick up The Devils. And then you got all the First Law books. You got Shattered Seas. You got a bunch of stuff to choose from.
Embarrassment
so
of riches.
Enjoy. Yeah. This humble man deserves his monies. And you can also follow SFF Addicts all across the board at SFF Addicts Pod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. And if you want a little bit of mushroom mystery in your life, you can go check out Mushroom Blues, available in all formats. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me across all the main socials at MJ Kuhn Books, or just go to my website, mjkuhn.com. And yeah, you can buy my books. Look at this. I remembered to actually say it for once.
Feed that
And
cat.
look at this. It's like perfect. He just jumped up like for it to be a sales
He
prop for
knows.
me.
He knows.
You gotta feed my like sweet fluffy baby. So buy my books.
He's too much fur. Not
I
enough
know.
fat.
He needs a haircut desperately. It's very expensive to get cat haircuts.
I can't even imagine a haircut for a cat going well. That sounds like the
imagine it either.
antithesis.
He would not take that well, I don't think.
Like, don't you fucking douse me in water, please. Greta, what about you?
Yeah, I'm on all the main socials at Greta K. Kelly. And if you want to, read about a bunch of chaos gremlins failing their way into a fight with a fallen god, check out The Queen of Days.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for listening. For now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.